that was a very nice introduction, and I want to thank you guys for inviting me. It's really great to be here. Let me just ask a quick question. How many of you have seen my lecture on YouTube, Are Humans Designed to Eat Meat? Can I see a show of hands? Oh, cool. So there's a lot of people in the room who haven't seen that. So all you have to do is go to YouTube, type in Dr. Milton Mills, and the lecture will pop up. And I encourage you to do that because for me, it's always important to understand why something either works or doesn't work. And when we start to look at why a plant-based diet is best for us as human beings, it starts with the fact that we are not omnivores, we are not carnivores, we are true herbivores. And that's why the closer we get to a plant-based diet and the more closely we adhere to that plant-based diet, the healthier we are, the longer we live, the less disease we have, and the lower our risk for dementia. And it's not enough just to live a long life if a huge portion of that life means you're stuck in a nursing home full of bed sores and you don't know who you are or the people who come to visit you are. That's not living, that's existing. So we want to live, we want to have a robust life, and we want to be healthy and active throughout our lives. And if that's the kind of life you want, then you definitely want to be plant-based. So today we're going to talk about the whole question of, is grass-fed beef the answer? Because you probably, like me, have heard people say, well, I only eat grass-fed beef. Like, really? You'd be better off eating the grass. And just leaving the cow alone. And this is because, people think that they've heard that when cows are ruminants, meaning they are the mammals that are designed to eat roughage like grasses. And yes, there is data that has shown that when these animals are allowed to eat their natural diet, that their health improves. And if you look at their physiology, the physiologic profile of their tissues is much better for them. And then people sort of make the assumption, well, that means that if I eat them, then I'll be much better. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, and the answer is no, not really. As I was driving over, I was talking with a couple who's going to be speaking a little later, and I told them, the crude analogy is this. Is the difference between eating grass-fed beef versus animals that were raised in a feedlot on corn is the difference between jumping off a 50-story building compared to jumping off a 20-story building. You're still gonna die. It's just one way you're gonna die much quicker. All right, let's get started. Actually, before I do that, let me do one thing real quick. I tend to like to move around a lot, and I have this little remote control device that allows me to be a little more animated, and so I want to go ahead and plug this thing in. Oh, thank you. All right, let's make sure it works. Yeah, there we go. So before we get to the horrors you see here, there are a lot of other horrors associated with raising animals and beef. We got depleted aquifers, we've got damage caused by overgrazing, we've got dead zones that result from nutrient runoff from all these factory farms, fish kills from manure spills, we've got the awful, huge CAFOs feedlots, and of course, more recently, the burning of the Amazon rainforest to clear pasture land for cattle grazing. So the question is all of this worth it? Are we destroying our planet for a good reason? And I generally start my lectures off with a quote from the Bible that says, "Wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all that getting, get understanding." And God's original advice to human beings was to eat a vegan diet, and that was good advice then, and it's even better advice now. So questions we're going to try and address with this lecture. Is the environmental impact of grass-fed beef versus conventionally raised beef better in terms of land and water use, better in terms of fossil fuel and the carbon footprint? Is it better in terms of the number of animals that are killed? Is the impact of grass-fed versus conventional beef on our health better? Is the animal protein healthy in and of itself? Is animal protein a higher quality than plant protein? Because we've all heard that animal protein is, better in terms of our health. Did any of you hear that very brief interview I did Friday morning on the local radio show? Yeah, before Wendy got pissed off with me and cut me off. Because, she had actually done a little pre-interview with me the day before, and she kept bringing up, well, nutritionists say that you need animal protein to get all of the amino acids and nutrients, and I'm like, okay, there are kids in the room, and I have to be But since we're talking about cattle, I'll say, I essentially told her that's a large load of male bovine fertilizer. And that just didn't sit well with her, because that clearly wasn't what she wanted to hear. But the fact is, it's the truth. It had long been thought that plant proteins weren't complete, that you had to do all of this, mixing and complicated combinations to get complete proteins, or that animal proteins were more absorbable, and none of that stuff is true. And in fact, as I hope you're going to see from this lecture, in fact, it's the plant proteins that are the healthiest and that do the best for your bodies. And then lastly, we're going to look at, well, can you build muscle with plant proteins? All right, so the environmental impact of beef production. When you look at cattle that are bred for beef production, they're raised in three principal ways. There's what's called conventional, which is where the animals are born, they stay with their mothers for about 6 months, then they go to a pasture, but more frequently they are pretty much sent almost directly to a feedlot, where they are fed with various combinations of grass, grain, and other compounds, which we'll discuss. And then they also receive what's called GET, G-E-T. That is an acronym that stands for Growth Enhancing Technology. And what that will consist of, as we will discuss, are steroid injections. These are long-acting steroid compounds that are injected directly into the animal, and then they have hormones that are added to their feed on a daily basis, and antibiotics. Then there are the natural animals, or the animals that are raised in the quote-unquote natural way. They, again, are essentially raised the same way, except they are not treated with the growth-enhancing technology. And then there are the grass-fed animals, which are the smallest numbers of animals. And again, primary difference between conventional and natural is the use of this GET technology. As I said, GET uses these steroid implants. It has the addition of what are called in-feed ionophores. And I will tell you that in preparing for this lecture, my learning curve was straight up. I mean, it was steeper than Mount Everest, because I had to go to the actual beef industry literature to find out what the hell is this stuff. And it turns out that ionophores are compounds that they have to put into the cows to prevent them from becoming so sick that they drop dead. Because what happens when they start feeding these ruminants this corn is that it can cause such a massive overgrowth of the bacteria and protozoa in their rumen that if they don't give them these chemical compounds to prevent certain bacteria from taking over, they'll get too sick and they'll die. And that's what these ionophores are. They actually modify the ion transfer from certain bacterial species to prevent them from becoming the predominant species in the rumen. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And then they also add what are called beta-adrenergic agonists, which are like adrenaline or epinephrine. And if you've ever had a shot of epinephrine, you know how that makes you feel. These are essentially stress hormones, but what the beta-adrenergic agonists do is, again, they alter the animal's physiology so that instead of shuttling energy into their fat cells, more of it goes into actually putting on muscle. And so the animals are essentially under stress 24/7. So again, when people are eating these conventionally raised animals, they're getting all of these hormones, all of these steroids that are still in their tissues, and all of these stressed hormones that are these beta-adrenergic agonists that these animals have ingested. And so the next time you see an 8-year-old girl who's starting to go through her menstrual cycle and develop breasts, you'll understand why. And again, why do they do this? Because the growth enhancing technology adds about 110 pounds per animal to their slaughter weight, and it also decreases for them to reach their slaughter weight by about 4.5% in terms of days. So in other words, they get bigger, faster, and people make money. Cattle raised in the grass-fed system always require more time and more animals to produce a given amount of beef because they grow more slowly, and ultimately when they finally do reach their quote-unquote slaughter weight, they are much smaller than animals that are raised in the conventional and natural systems. And so therefore, to produce like 1 billion pounds of muscle tissue, you're going to need many more animals, and I'll have a chart that'll show that in a bit. Grass-fed systems also use more land because, they're eating more grass. They use more water because, again, you have to irrigate these grasses to make them grow, and more energy because you're pumping the pasture land full of fertilizers, and you've got to also, since grass doesn't grow during the winter, you have to grow enough extra grass to basically stop this stuff to overwinter these animals during the winter time. So it just takes a lot more energy. So I hope the picture that you guys are already getting is that this idea that somehow grass-fed animals are more green is nonsense. It takes much more energy, much more water, much more land to try and raise and many more animals. So the suffering and cruelty is far greater in the grass-fed system than it is in the conventional system. I mean, there's different kinds of cruelty in the conventional system, but the grass-fed system is absolutely not better. And so again, the mistaken impression people have is that it's somehow more sustainable, but that clearly is not supported by research. There's simply not enough natural forage available to produce the numbers of animals that are needed to meet beef demand. Creating pasture land to produce an entirely grass-fed, the numbers of animals needed to meet our beef demand would require huge inputs of water, fertilizer, and fossil fuel. Now, let's look at the American buffalo. So, total annual cattle production, both beef and dairy, for the last, I think these numbers are from 2017, was about 96 million animals. Okay, if you only look at just the beef, the animals raised for beef, in 2017, it was about 68 million, okay? Well, before Europeans arrived in North America, there were around 60 million buffalo running around North America. And if you look at in the green here, in this green area, you see that the plains buffalo basically circulated, those 60 million animals needed an area that comprised about 60% of the North American continent between the Appalachian and Rocky Mountains. That's how large an area you need to support 60 million 1.5 ton animals in a grass-fed system. Because basically, they come into an area, they eat up the grass, and then they move to a different area, allow that area to recover, eat the grass in that area, and they do this, basically this migratory pattern where they move from area to area, feed, allow the area to recover, and then come back. Well, clearly, I don't think the people in Colorado, Wyoming, and Illinois are going to allow cows to come roaming through their living rooms. Nor are they going to grow the type of grass that they need to, these animals need to feed on in their front yard. So the idea that we would be able to sustain the numbers of animals that are produced annually so that people can eat their hamburgers in a natural system is absolutely ludicrous. So it's been estimated that if we were to say use an artificial system where we just use irrigated cropland, so that's assuming you guys understand what the difference that I'm making between natural versus an irrigated pasture land, right? So let's just say, okay, fine, we admit we've got shopping malls and movie theaters and homes in Texas and Illinois and Indiana, so a natural system is out. All right, we're just gonna create our own grass and make pasture land. Well, how much land would we need? Well, if you want to raise 68 million animals on irrigated pasture land, you're going to need an area that's equivalent to about 75% of the land area of Texas. That is still a monstrously huge amount of land that is not available. And again, the additional water, fossil fuel use, and carbon emissions simply have not been calculated. Because again, when you're talking about that many animals, especially if you're feeding them grass, they're pooping a whole lot more.
That's what I've been saying.
And you not only, and when we think about greenhouse gas emissions, which again, we know that after transportation, animal-based agribusiness is the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions that are moving this world towards a climate change crisis where we're really already there. It's not just cow belching and cow farts. It's actually the breakdown of their manure. So the more manure you produce, the more greenhouse gas emissions you're also getting. So yeah, poop stinks. So let's look at the typical life cycle for cows. Cows are bred annually. I will leave it to the animal rights people to talk about the rape racks and how these cows are forcibly impregnated. The calves spend, again, about 6 months with their mothers before they go to the auction markets where stockers pick them up, and then they're usually sent to the feedlots. And on the feedlots, they spend 6 to 12 months feeding on a variety of different types of forage that is designed to make them gain weight very rapidly, and this is where the growth enhancing technology is usually applied. And the beta-adrenergic agonists are also utilized to alter their physiology to make them gain weight. The beta-adrenergic agonists alter these animals' physiology so severely, it turns a lot of them into downer cows, where they become so sick and so stressed that they can't walk. And if you have looked at some of the animal rights literature, you have undoubtedly seen pictures of animals being dragged by cranes into a slaughterhouse. And these are likely animals that have been made sick by these compounds.
That's crazy.
I tell you, doing this lecture was, it took a lot to get through this literature. Now, ruminants there are two basic feeding strategies in mammals. You got foregut and hindgut fermentation amongst the herbivores. And ruminants are the animals, like the cows, that have the multiple stomachs, and they're designed to break down cellulose in their four stomachs. And there are monogastric herbivores like horses, primates, humans, who eat plant foods that have a lot of intrinsic nutrient value. So like an apple or a potato or beans or grains. Those types of plant foods have a lot of energy in them right there in that apple or in those beans. And so when you eat that, all you have to do is liquefy that meal, and as it passes through your small intestine, you extract all of that readily available nutrition, and then the fiber that's left over goes into the colon, where a population of bacteria, which we now call our microbiome, then acts on that leftover fiber to break it down into compounds that affect our health in a very favorable way. Now that's a whole nother lecture, and it's a wonderful lecture, but we don't have time to cover that today. Well, ruminants normally don't eat that type of plant material. They eat stuff like hay and grass that does not have a lot of intrinsic nutrient value. And it's comprised mainly of cellulose. What's the problem with cellulose? Mammals don't have enzymes that break cellulose apart, but bacteria do. And so in this first stomach here is a soup that is made up of bacteria and protozoa that release enzymes that can break down cellulose. And what will happen is the cow comes along and it first scoops up a stomach full of grass and just swallows it. It lets it soak up those enzymes, and then what does it do? It brings it back up and chews the cud. That's what chewing the cud is all about. It's about mixing that grass with those bacterial enzymes so the process of digestion can really start. That's why they do that. And foregut fermentation is very, very efficient, which is why if you've looked at horse poop, you know that it's solid, has a lot of undigested fiber. Cow poop is liquid, because it's a much more efficient process. These are all little fun facts to know. Now you can go to, well, I know why cow poop is liquid. But weight gain on grasses is always slower than on these high energy grains. And again, because now, as you can imagine, if you've got a stomach full of bacteria and you start eating high energy foodstuffs, that's going to make those bacteria go hog wild. One of the reasons diabetics have such a hard time clearing infections is because bacteria can actually multiply faster than antibiotics can kill them. And that's why when a diabetic's blood sugar is out of control, they're going to eventually lose their limb if they don't get their diabetes under control. Because we simply can't kill the bugs faster than they can grow if they have a food source. And something similar will happen with these animals, which is why they give them all these ionophores and antibiotics to try and keep the population of bacteria in check so that they don't burn up all of that energy and the energy is available to the animal. Does that make sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't, I want you to raise your hand, because I don't want to leave anybody behind here. I want you guys to, unlike George Bush, who left all kinds of people behind, I don't want to leave anybody behind. All right. Anyway, so that's the purpose of the ionophores. Well, so this is just a schematic to show you that starch and cellulose are made of exactly the same things. Glucose, sugar. The only difference is in the structure of the sugar and how they're joined together. Starch is made up of the alpha monomer of glucose. Cellulose is made up of the beta monomer, and they're joined by these beta 1,4 bonds, which means that they kind of flip when they're attached to one another. And just that simple change means that cellulose is like very strong. I know this is fake wood, but you know what I'm saying. It's hard, it's solid, it doesn't dissolve in water. But it's pretty amazing. But that means that if you can figure out how to break those bonds, then you've got yourself a whole lot of energy. And bacteria can do that for us. And so in addition to using GET, or this growth enhancing technology to augment weight gain, cattle are also fed all sorts of non-traditional materials in order to keep costs down. Like what? Chicken crap. And every year, at least in the United States and probably in Canada as well, 1 to 2 million tons of chicken manure called and they euphemistically refer to it as broiler litter, really, is fed to cows, mixed in with their food. Why do they do that? It's because birds have very short and inefficient digestive systems. They don't process all of the fiber that they're fed. So that's what this diagram shows you. It's like if you look at sheep, cow, horse, and pig poop, you see they use up most of their nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but not the chickens. So they come along, they scoop up this chicken poop, and they mix it in with the feed that they feed to the cattle. And again, because those ruminants are so efficient at processing fiber, they're able to extract a lot of the energy that's in the stuff. But now you know why the people at Walmart are so petty. Yeah, this is what people are eating, ladies and gentlemen. According to industry standards, animals can't be fed chicken manure for at least 2 weeks prior to slaughter. It's disgusting. It is just disgusting. And in addition to chicken manure, cattle often fed ground up wood pulp and non-bovine, and also rendered non-bovine animal parts. And then there are what are called estrogenic growth promoters in beef. In 1979, there was an epidemic of breast enlargement in Italian children. They traced it back to some of these steroid hormone implants that these animals were being used in cattle production. In Europe, they had the good sense to ban the use of these drugs, but the United States said, to hell with that, we're going to continue using it, and so the Europeans, again, intelligently banned importation of beef from the United States. American agribusiness continues to use these synthetic estrogens and anabolic growth promoters such as Zeranol and Ralgo, Magnum, and these things have been found to be persistent in the animal's tissues. It can be found in the muscle meat that's being sold in the supermarket. Zeranol is as potent as estradiol, which is the primary female sex hormone, and it's also as potent as DES, which was found in the 1970s to cause reproductive cancers in women and in their children. And so the bottom line is that without federal regulation, people are just being fed all kinds of things that undoubtedly are making them sick and creating all kinds of cancer. So here is the first chart I want to show you, and it can be appreciated from this chart. What you're looking at is you see conventional versus natural versus grass-fed. And so you see that when you look at the growth rate, clearly the grass-fed animals are growing at a slower rate. That if you just come over to the column that says end weight in kilograms, you see that the grass-finished animals are much smaller. You see that it takes them close, at least almost 150 more days to even get to the weight that they get to. You guys see what I'm talking about here? So this is the age in days. It takes them 679 days versus 440 days for the conventional animals. But they still are smaller because they're only 192 kilograms versus 204 kilograms for the conventional animals. Because again, when you pump them full of steroids and give them all this garbage, it makes them grow much, much faster. And so this means that the grass-fed animals require more energy, more manure, and emit more greenhouse gases. And because they're smaller, when they're ultimately slaughtered, you have to kill more animals to get a given amount of marketable beef. And then, compared to the grass-fed system, using the conventional system requires about 56% fewer animals, uses almost 25% less water, influences the fatty acid profiles of animal tissues, and people often promote the health benefits of grass-fed meat and dairy based on the improved ratios of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. Because the thinking is omega-6 fatty acids are pro-inflammatory, whereas the omega-3 fatty acids are anti-inflammatory. And compared to grain-fed animals, grass-fed animals have higher levels of the anti-inflammatory omega-3s in their tissues. And so it was hypothesized that, or it's believed that a healthy balance of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids in our diet should be about 1 to 4. In other words, we should have 4 times more omega-6 than we have omega-3. Well, the problem is that in the typical Western diet, our omega-6 to omega-3 ratios are more like somewhere between 1 to 10 to 1 to 20, because people are eating so much fried food, so much processed food, and adding so much oil to the food that they eat. We're getting just tons and tons of omega-6 and not very much omega-3. And people have argued that that is one of the reasons that it's this overconsumption of these omega-6 oils that we see so much chronic disease and autoimmune problems because of the problems with inflammation. And so people have suggested that, well, if we produce grass-fed beef and if we ate grass-fed beef, that would help reverse this problem, right? That's the solution. It's not like eating healthy and stop eating junk food. No, it's just let's feed animals grass and then kill them. So for a variety of reasons, this mode of thinking is clearly misguided and very unlikely to meet with success. Why? Because it's highly unlikely that the people who eat Cheetos and French fries are going to go out and look for grass-fed beef and pay the extra money it takes to purchase it. It's also not clear that even if they were to change to grass-fed beef, that they could consume enough of it to offset the severely skewed ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 caused by the rest of their diet. I mean, if you've got an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of like 1 to 15 because you are eating French fries, Cheetos, and cookies, the fact that you have a hamburger made from a grass-fed animal is not going to help you, okay? I mean, do you understand my point? I mean, the idea that you can eat a piece of grass-fed beef and everything's gonna be wonderful is just ridiculous. I mean, you're kidding yourself. Some studies have actually shown that the omega-6s have anti-inflammatory properties themselves. An analysis of 20 prospective cohort studies from 10 different countries showed that linoleic acid, which is a omega-6 fatty acid, actually helped prevent diabetes, and arachidonic acid, which again comes from omega-6 fatty acids, was not actually harmful. And in studies where they actually gave people omega-3 supplements to try and prevent heart disease, they had no effect. They found that they weren't helpful in preventing heart disease at all. But they can raise your risk for stroke, so not a good thing. So here is a chart that shows you differences in the total saturated fat content from grass-fed versus grain-fed animals. And yes, what you do see is that the grass-fed animals do have, less total fat in their tissues. I mean, that's the take-home message, that if you feed animals grass, which is their natural diet, they will have less fat. Is it enough to have any real-world significance? No. It's like the difference between, I don't know, what examples could I use? I don't know, Donald Trump and Bill Barr. I mean, one is less fat than the other, but it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. Yeah, I mean, again, you get a little bit less fat, but not enough to make a difference. It's the 20-story building. Both of you are going, you might pass the guy on the 20-story building on the way down, but ultimately both of y'all are going to hit that ground. And neither one of you are going to get up. So, it doesn't help. And according to taste tests done by the beef industry, people don't like grass-fed beef because it's lean. It doesn't have that nice, squishy, greasy taste that they like. So they're not gonna buy it anyway. Taste tests have repeatedly shown people prefer the greasy, corn-fed beef. And this chart looks at the polyunsaturated oil content of grain-fed versus grass-fed. And yes, again, but this is the thing that I really want you guys to pay attention to. You see that you do get, like, so the corn-fed has, 0.019 grams of omega-3s versus 0.033 grams. Woohoo! That's not going to help you. That's like, okay, we're in two cars heading toward a wall at 60 miles an hour, and my car slows down to 55. But we both hit the wall. Again, it's not helpful. You guys get it? Are you getting my point? So this idea that somehow grass-fed beef is going to be the savior of the world, it's like, how many of you watched the Jetsons as kids? You remember the flying car on the Jetsons?
Yeah.
Why don't we have flying cars? Because it was a nice idea that had no real world practicality. And that's what grass-fed beef is. It's a nice idea in some people's minds, but it's unworkable. It has no real world significance or practicality. All right, and so the dangers and damage caused by the animal protein itself, and the heme iron and the additional saturated fat far outweigh any minor benefits people would get from a few milligrams of extra saturated fatty acid. Unsaturated fatty acid. How much more time do I have? Huh? Oh, cool. All right, we're good. Okay, all right, we're cooking with gas, but we're only cooking vegetables. So animal protein has been linked to a number of problems, and so I hope that I have adequately dispensed with this nonsense about grass-fed beef being healthy.
Yes.
That's, again, BS, and that means bad stuff. But there's still this question, well, okay, all right, Dr. Mills, what about moderation? I hate that question. Moderation. I'm like, okay, so your child comes home and says, Mom, I'm gonna smoke crack, but only in moderation. Are you good with that?
Yeah.
No, you can't do bad things in moderation. It doesn't work. So the question is animal protein okay in small amounts? And I'm telling you, the answer is no. And so I'm going to answer the question for you, why is that? Why is animal protein bad for us as humans? Because animal protein has been consistently linked to heart disease, cancer, diabetes, osteoporosis, prion diseases like mad cow disease, Alzheimer's and other dementias, high blood pressure, stroke, kidney failure, kidney disease, kidney stones, dysentery, and other foodborne illnesses. It's a potent cancer promoter in non-nursing humans. Putrefaction of animal protein in our colons exacerbates depression, anxiety, ADHD. It creates high levels of homocysteine, which again can exacerbate stroke, Alzheimer's, osteoporosis, and heart disease. Well, why is it? It's because wrong signals lead to disaster, as this person unfortunately found out. All right. Are these animals, what is the natural diet for these animals? So then, at what point in their lives do they eat animal protein? Who says never? When they're nursing, when they're babies. Mm-hmm. So that means that animal protein for plant-eating animals is a growth signal. Do you get that? Anytime a plant-eating animal sees animal protein, the body starts trying to grow. The cells start turning on growth genes, which is wonderful if you're an infant. It's disastrous if you're an adult. Does anybody not get that? I mean, because if you don't remember, I don't care if you don't remember what I look like, but the one thing I want you to remember when you walk out of this room is that as a plant eater, if your body gets exposed to animal protein, your cells are going to turn on growth genes. And you may end up with a lipoma, a skin tag, a uterine fibroid, a prostate the size of New Jersey, or a cancer. So again, herbivorous mammals should only be exposed to animal protein during infancy when they're rapidly growing. It's a protein growth signal, and it turns on oncogenes that can cause transformation in these cells and turn them into cancerous cells. Well, what evidence do we have that that's true? Well, it turns out that the early nutritionists got it completely backwards, okay? Because they thought that, when they looked at plant proteins and they looked at animal proteins, they said, wait a minute, the animal proteins are closer in composition to human tissues. So that means that animal proteins are better quality. That was the thinking, that was the reasoning. And they looked at eggs and they said, eggs are the closest of the things that we normally eat, or usually eat, eggs come the closest in composition to our tissues. So that makes egg the perfect protein. That was literally the reasoning. Does that make sense to anybody? Because if that's the reasoning that we're using, then I should be eating ham. Right?
Yep.
Because he has exactly the same amino acid composition as my tissues. To hell with the eggs. I mean, it's just stupid. So again, entirely backwards. Research shows plant proteins are absolutely the best. Common myths that are still in existence, as Wendy tried to push on me, you can't get enough protein on a vegan diet or plant-based diet, that plant proteins are not complete. Again, BS, BS, BS. Animal protein is better quality.